It's super cool to be here and to see so many folks taking up the mantle of value-priced monetization, something that I've believed in and I've practiced from the beginning of my career before I even knew what it was called. And for the past 10 plus years at Simon-Kucher, I've been preaching it to my clients. So I'm very excited to be up here with these three fine gentlemen talking about how this shift to value-based monetization is really kicking into high gear. Like, I really see it. It's amazing that we're in this space right now, all talking about it, every single topic. And it's in such high gear. How do we, as an organization, how do we actually implement this and execute it in a way where we can win in this shift? So the panelists that I have with me here today, very excited to introduce them. We've got, I'll start here with Mandar Kulkari. He's a Senior Director of Product Management at Astronomer. He was recently at Confluent, where he led the pricing teams through the IPO. And prior to that, I had the pleasure of working with Mandar at Simon-Kucher for a couple of years, leading teams and clients in pricing and go-to-market strategy. And we've got Craig Shull, Executive Vice President of Pricing Strategy at Salesforce. If you rewind all the way back to 2005, he founded the Salesforce Pricing and Deal Desk team and functions there. He left in 2015 to start his own company. And recently, about a couple years ago, came back to Salesforce to lead the monetization team there. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Justin Farris, VP of Product Monetization at GitLab, ex-Zillow product leader, Seattle startup true believer, and he holds strong opinions on price models, growth loops, and how to convince CEOs they don't know anything about pricing. So he's a great person to have on a panel and on your team. Awesome. So thank you guys for being here. Why don't we start with why now? Why is it more important than ever for monetization to be treated as a strategic pillar in the organization? And Craig, maybe we can start with you, because Salesforce was, or has been, the gold standard for seat-based pricing, since it feels like the beginning of time at this point. How has Salesforce responded to the shift, and what are some of the teams and role shifts that had to happen in order to make it an effective shift?
Yeah. Use the term gold standard. I'm not sure 7,000 SKUs is a standard here.
That's what nobody sees.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to my CMO last week, and he said, when you confuse people, you make them sad. And I think it's such a good line. But anyway, to your question, Salesforce, although we really pioneered sort of the seat-based pricing over time and acquisitions. Actually, we had a sizable consumption-based product set. We have our marketing cloud, our commerce cloud, et cetera. But about a year ago, we had a strategic meeting, and we said we're leaning all in on sort of the hybrid model, that we want to disrupt ourselves. And so we introduced what we call our Flex agreement, which is an agreement that says if you buy seats from us, you can trade them in and use that money for sort of consumption, because we want to allow our customers the flexibility. People are wondering right now, like, is it seats going to go away? How fast are they going to go away? And so we want to give that optionality to them, but guess what? We need to build those products that have value, that sort of that have a consumption to sort of offset that license decline. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And then Justin at GitLab. GitLab is a bit different, right? Because you guys started as open source.
Right.
So, can you walk us through the journey of going from open source to enterprise monetization?
Yeah.
And how did the role of pricing change as you guys were making that shift?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually started my GitLab journey as a customer, as similar to Sam's chart, PLG motion. I was at Zillow. We couldn't ship software fast enough, so I bought GitLab. And it was built off the roots of this amazing open source project that the community loved, and it wasn't GitHub. I joined the company, and changing anything with pricing was like the worst of what Scott was describing earlier. It was multiple years of just fighting and debates, and part of that was because the roots of what was valuable was actually in that open source repository. And so you actually had a hard time just converting base customers to pay you anything. And so what happened was actually Kyle, I think, wrote a blog post, wherever Kyle went. And I leveraged that to pitch to our CEO, like, hey, we have to rethink how we do this, we need the dictator model. I didn't call it that. I might change my title when I get back to the office. But we need this model that enables a smaller team to have a lot more autonomy to experiment there. Because if we did it the way we would probably never, GitLab would probably never change pricing. We'd have never experimented with packaging. And so by creating that role, covering pricing, the billing systems, the product-led growth teams, we're able to rethink that evolution. And what happened over the years was this interesting dynamic, like the market shifted, and the more larger customers wanted to consolidate dev tooling, there were less people like me back at Zillow that can make that independent decision. And so they were looking for this platform solution, and we had to follow the market and evolve pricing to meet that demand. So what was happening was the buyers changed from a director, an individual VP, to the C-suite, CTO, CIO, CISO, making that buying decision. And we have this buyer-based tiering model and had to evolve that pretty rapidly to understand that demand and that curve and where that was going, and really moved away. Like, we didn't do what Sam does at HubSpot. We moved away from that PLG motion predominantly and really focused on, like, we were landing in Pro, ours was called Premium, and we sort of said, hey, we don't actually care anymore about those small lands. Let's reorient pricing and packaging, and specifically packaging around that first land that should be that like CISO buyer making that decision.
Interesting. And Mandar, you recently joined Astronomer. That's born usage-based early stage company. But before that, you led monetization at Confluent. And I'm curious, just from that vantage point, like, what did you learn at Confluent about turning monetization into a strategic pillar, and how do you think about that at your new role in Astronomer?
Thanks for that question, Michelle, and I'm glad it's a pricing-related question, because otherwise I would be like, go talk to Gwyneth Paltrow. So going back to usage-based, right? Like, I mean, we saw across different talks since the morning, like how the complexity has increased, right? It was license-based, seed-based. You can kind of argue that they're simpler. They're definitely simpler. And now you have usage-based. Now think about if you are a multi-product company like Confluent. Like, every product manager is shipping features, and every feature you want to think about how do I want to monetize it? What are the cost structures? How do I want to bill it? How do I want the PLG experience to be, right? Like, so if you let that product manager think about pricing and the product itself, like, you're not going to find like 10 product managers who know everything, right? Like, so it's really about centralizing that role and then giving that role the ability and the power and essentially visibility to think about all of that, right? Like, so the way we built this role at Confluent was we basically created a team that had me, and I ended up owning essentially costs, so all of our cloud costs, and then just was really involved in like figuring that out and how it impacts our margins. I own billing, and I owned all of the pricing, right? Like, so, and then there was my counterpart in the team who was PLG, right? So think about, the way I love to think about it is just like how a bill becomes a law. I like to think about it as how a feature becomes revenue, right? So think about, like, when you think about a feature, like, how much does it cost? Well, how am I going to think, what's the PLG experience for this, right? How am I going to model it, price it? How am I going to bill for it? And how is my finance team eventually going to think about recognizing that revenue? So I think combining that team and then having that team in product really worked very well for us. Because as a very product-first team, engineering-first team, it was very good, very important for us to be close to product and engineering.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a couple of themes there. It's, pulling it all together, having somebody oversee it, whether through diktat or, through collaboration. But really making sure that pricing isn't the redheaded stepchild that it used to be back in the days, and we're seeing it more and more common. This idea of the chief value officer and this idea of somebody who's truly owning it, and it's an important strategic pillar. One of the core principles that we at Simon-Kucher try to espouse in our clients is that pricing is an iterative loop, right? It's not a one and done, and that dovetails well with somebody needs to own it, right? It is a job, and it is something that needs continuous nurturing. And Justin, let's go back to you in terms of the shift from open source to enterprise monetization. I think that the role of the chief value officer must have helped sustain that balance between community and then monetization, or that, the shift to monetization without upsetting your community too much. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that role worked?
Yeah, I was telling Scott earlier, I think the most effective I have ever been at GitLab was a period of time when I reported directly to the CEO. If you don't know GitLab, Sitze Brandy founded the company, basically took an open source project that was about 3 years old, started contributing to it, and then turned it into a business. And then they went to YC, and the rest is history. Sid was the face and the voice of that wider community, the community of open source contributors, the community of probably many of the technical folks that you've worked with in your careers that have made the decision to bring in GitLab into your organization. And so every time there was a sort of a tense debate, Sid really had to be the tiebreaker. And so it made a lot more sense for him to pull me out from underneath the chief product officer and have me report to him so that he could he was actually probably the dictator, but I was his second in command. And what that enabled me to do was only have to debate with him. Because what I was seeing myself doing was constantly fighting with the CRO, the CFO, the CMO, 15 different product leaders, and then basically anyone in the company. Everyone has an opinion about pricing, right? And when I was reporting to Sid, I was like, okay, great. I could disagree with Sid, but I knew that he was my single sort of battlefront I had to worry about in those debates. And then once we decided, I had all the autonomy to execute. And basically go back to the CRO and say, I'm glad you have that opinion. Thanks for sharing it. Sid and I have decided we're going to move forward, right? And that works incredibly well. Balancing that feedback from the wider community, I wanted to make sure that I was the closest to who represented that voice. This is the main thing. And so if that's not the CEO, if you're in a situation like that, you have to figure out who that is. Is it developer relations? Is it someone in the marketing function? And align yourself tightly to them, because it's amazing how much that community really will react viscerally to a bad decision. And as hard as it is to make pricing changes, and you want to build that flywheel to make them more quickly, you have to build that trust in that community, because they'll just flame you on Reddit or wherever. And that actually, in a weird way, affects the enterprise buyer who you might not associate with that same person, right? So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I see you nodding. I mean, you probably have a lot of experience from Confluent with that same challenge. I'm curious about Astronomer. I know you've only been there, I think, a few months, but they're on a very granular usage-based model. What are some of the novel challenges you see, or you are expecting to see running that continuous loop in that sort of usage-based environment?
Yeah, funny enough, I think Astronomer, when I joined, I'm like, oh, they must be on a purely usage-based model. And I think I was very surprised to find that, no, they were trying to sell some new features in a very fixed, subscription type way. So I think the first order of business for me was to no guys, we need to move to this usage-based thing. And then really for me, it's more about kind of being that change agent, right? It's this is the right structure for us. This is going to work. This has worked in the market. And then here is how we operationalize it. Here is how we here are the KPIs that we track. Here are the signals that we look for. Here is how we kind of get feedback and kind of test it out with the customers. And then here's how we manage the change, right? How do you talk about it with existing customers? How do you launch a new thing with the new customers? And then how do you get the existing customers migrated over, right? And I think just kind of having a real structure around it, really talking about it internally is going to go a long way. And that was kind of my learning.
Interesting. And Craig, what about at Salesforce? Because Salesforce feels like a big behemoth in terms of operationalizing pricing as a continuous loop. I know you guys have a very large pricing team that you run. What does that look like in terms of the iterative loops at Salesforce?
Yeah. Well, I'll go a little off script and just say how much I love the term monetize. One of the things we did last year is we changed the name from pricing to monetization. And the reason being is I wanted that person that owns our sales cloud to think I'm the chief monetization officer, not just I want to price this product, get it through the MPI process. Are you talking to the field and understanding what the challenges are? Are you coming up with deal structures? Are you coming up with upgrade strategies? I think that is when Scott and I met, I was like, oh, if the thing is called Monetize, I'll go to it.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny because, at Simon-Kucher, we used to say, oh, we own pricing, blah, 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 about 5 or so years ago. I was like, that's a terrible way to talk about it because people think then you assign a $9.99 price point to something and be on your way, and that's not.
It's also been, I found it's been very empowering for the people because it actually opens up in their mind what they're allowed to do.
Absolutely.
And it actually empowers them a little bit. And like you said, we're talking about this chief value officer, chief pricing officer, but there's, especially at Salesforce, at our scale, I have mini chief monetization officers that are for each of these clouds. But yeah, as I talked about before, we had 7,000 SKUs. I have 17 GMs. 7 of them have billion-dollar businesses. I have systems from a decade ago. And so the actual move to consumption, we knew exactly well, I don't think we know exactly because we're figuring out on the fly. But what we did know is that our internal systems and our processes, how we compensated AEs, et cetera, was not going to evolve. And so we for the last year, twice a week, we have an executive meeting that we call it ACT, Consumption Transformation, where we literally hammer all of the internal challenges because you come out with a pricing model, but your sales incentives aren't aligned. It's dead in the water.
Yep.
You come out with a pricing model and your systems can't support it and everything has to be manual, it's dead in the water. And so for us, that's a challenge that's actually probably even bigger or harder than sort of just figuring out what the price points are.
Right. Absolutely, yeah, and even, just to double down on that point, there's a strategy, and then there's making sure that everyone else's goals are aligned to that strategy, and sales compensation is not something we're necessarily getting into, but it's such a key component. Everybody needs to be walking or running in the same direction, so it's great that you guys are meeting so frequently on
that one slide that was up there earlier, which was the chief pricing or the pricing in the middle, and then all of the, that's what makes the job challenging.
Yep.
You're trying to organize, but it also makes it sort of fun and you can have impact.
Yep, it's a cross-functional topic.
Yeah, that's why I came here for therapy.
Yeah, you can sit on my couch anytime. Very cool. So I know we are what's standing between people and lunch. So maybe one last rapid fire question. I'll go down the line, starting with you, Mandar, and if you could just answer what's next, or what do you think is next in your monetization models in the next 12 to 18 months, and how do you think that role, that central role of chief value officer, is going to need to change to meet the moment and the change that's coming in the next year or two?
Yeah, I think the first thing is obviously AI. I think Astronomer is launching this IDE that's going to help people code the Airflow stuff better. So again, all of the discussions today so far has been really informative, and then I'm going to kind of take that, but kind of again orienting the company around that usage-based AI model is number one. And then second, kind of closely relating to what Sam was saying, is I really want the PLG motion at Astronomer to become kind of get refocused as potentially the PLS motion, so product-led sales. Because in a lot of enterprise sales companies, what happens is that you kind of create something, and then that grows, but kind of flatlines. And I think the real way to, what we found at Confluent was the real way to use that was to use the PLG as a funnel to sales. So I think that's something that I'm going to focus on for the next 12 to 18 months.
About 4 months ago, Mark Benioff grabbed me and he said, "Hey, you need a new title." And I was like, I don't care about titles. He's like, "You need a new title. You're going to be the chief pricing officer." And I was like, I don't care. I don't need a new title. And he said, "I need you to have that title so you can break down the walls within Salesforce." And it was pretty empowering for me to have that. Now, it comes with challenges because now I feel like I need to be an expert across 16 different clouds because I want to make the right decision. But our primary focus is 2 things. One is, how do I simplify? Because I have 10,000 reps, I have a lot of customers, and I've made them all sad. And then 2 is, as AI evolves, and I think everyone knows that that's super fluid, is how do we make sure that we're sort of not standing back on a seat-based model, that we're fluid and that we're moving and we're sort of adapting and sort of moving to the hybrid motion.
Disrupting yourself.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think for me, everything we've been talking about today resonates, but one of the things that I haven't heard yet that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about is how companies are going to think about monetizing MCP. So everyone's building agents, and I see amongst a lot of startups I advise and the place I work today, everyone's freaking out about we can't keep up with venture-backed AI native startups, and we need our data to be available to them so our customers still find value in our product because they're all using these third-party agents. But then there's a freak out. Oh my God, what happens if we're still seat-based for the majority of our revenue, all of a sudden that customer doesn't need so many seats anymore because they've moved that to agents. We don't have a usage billing system to support it. Should we directly monetize the access to our data and the tools that these agents are building through MCP? And my hypothesis is there will be companies that over-rotate there and over-monetize access to MCP, and we'll have some spectacular failures that we can all learn from, and then figure out in 12 months what the right recipe is to solve that problem.
Awesome. Well,
I
thank
wanna
you
talk
all.
to you about MCP.
Yeah. Thank you all for your time. Hopefully you guys found it useful. I know lots of really good information, lots of heavy experience here, so appreciate it.